On Tuesday of last week, Tynwald approved, unanimously, the appointment of the Isle of Man Broadcasting Company to operate Manx radio and provide listeners on the island with their own local broadcasting service.
Well, that's how it started 60 years ago. The then Governor, Sir Ronald Garvey. The years come and go, and still there on the radio, from the crack of dawn to twilight's last gleaming and quite often further, the sounds of this small island. Varied, I should cocoa. Over the last 12 months, I have been searching the dark, dusty, spider-infested, ghost-haunted mausoleum of memories that is the Manx Radio Archive, and I've been releasing it slowly, carefully, artfully into your ears. Over the next hour, once again, those who became the stitches in the tapestry that hung on the walls of those years. Enjoy.
My life has been a tapestry of rich and royal hue, an everlasting vision of the ever-changing view, a wondrous woven magic in bits of blue and gold, a tapestry to feel and see, impossible to hold. Once amid the soft silver sound.
I'm cutting out so that you can hear him cross the line. The wonder boy of motorcycle racing, I never thought that we should find a man with such absolute brilliance as this. The youngster has everything that is required, a splendid temperament, a very charming personality, and absolutely superb. Here they come, they're coming down side by side. It's bad, I don't know the bell has got flying, but you've crossed the line about a length in front of Artie Bell. Just imagine those two chaps now going into the paddock to receive congratulations. The photographers are running across the road, they're breaking all rules. Chase them off, you mustn't do that. Everybody crowding around them as they go into the paddock. The whole stand's going absolutely mad.
You will also be the last Deemster, presumably, to pronounce a death sentence in the Isle of Man.
Yes, the law's been changed since that time.
Is that right, that it should have been changed?
Lawyers, and particularly judges, do not interfere in matters of policy. The legislators legislate, and the lawyers, particularly the judges, administer the law, and there shouldn't be any confusion between the two. Each does respect the function of the other.
For 60 years, Manx Radio has been broadcasting to this island, but right from the start, its usefulness in times of emergency became apparent. Less than a year after it came into being in 1965, heavy snowfall underlined the station's role in passing on news and information.
Right now you're listening to the Paul Squire Show, coming your way from Manx Radio, your station for Brightly Broadcasting. Don't forget, anyone with information on radio conditions, please phone Douglas 2927, or if you're in trouble, stuck somewhere, let us know and we'll see what we can do for you. All right, 2927 is the phone number.
You're in tune with your happy listening station, Manx Radio, broadcasting from Douglas, Isle of Man, and we've just had a telephone call from a Mrs. Bucknell to say that Mr. Parker and his friend is supposed to be among 6 transport men and some railway men who are walking from Ramsey to Laxey, and Mrs. Bucknell has taken the car out and she's going to take it as far as she can to pick them up. So there you are. It pays to advertise on Manx Radio. The Andreas Road is still under heavy drifts and men are still working on it. The badminton game between Albion versus Crosby, which was to be held at Crosby tonight, has now been cancelled. All the main roads on the island are very bad. The Douglas to Peel Road is open, however the going will be extremely hard and motorists are advised to wait until tomorrow if possible before using this road. The coastal road in the Outland area is very badly blocked and this area is north of Santon. Richmond Hill is clear but it's very slippery and again you are advised to keep off if possible. There is no chance of getting to Castletown from Douglas, although the road from Ballasalla to Castletown is now clear. From Ballasalla south to Colby is impassable unless you go via Castletown and the Shore Road. From Ballacrane to Kirkmichael is completely blocked by snowdrifts.
Don't forget, we'll be back with you again tomorrow morning, bright and early, 8 o'clock. Manx Radio, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, going right through the day until 8 tomorrow evening. And that song goes in the background. This is Paul Squire saying to you, ciao, ciao for now, until tomorrow. See you round. Before you turn square.
It all started really on the morning of Thursday.
I still remember the trauma of the dead animals.
I can remember that the situation, don't like saying it, it did become life-threatening, not just to the public, but to all the services that were working that evening. I particularly remember the situation in Kirkmichael, trees coming down, we had overhead power lines falling, and we had to pull our resources out of Kirkmichael. It was so unsafe.
We're struggling with access into areas like Cronky Dolby and Patrick. All schools will close at 1 o'clock.
Any people out there with diggers or RB4s or whatever, they should get in touch as well.
They're just caught. What is so frustrating is you feel so helpless in it.
It did arrive from the south, trying to replace the cold air from the north. It did also have a battle zone where there was strong to gale force winds from the east. But in terms of severity, the two are completely different. Perhaps the snowfall events will continue to be pretty rare. My fear is that we'll tend to see more likely occurrences of heavy rainfall events and gales on a seasonal basis more frequently and perhaps sometimes more extreme than we used to see before. 1 or 2 of these events every 5 to 10 years may be a significant snowfall event, then perhaps that adds weight to this aspect of climate change.
A number of programmes on Manx Radio became firm favourites over the years. One such was the Kringle File. David Callister asked its author how he came up with so much entertaining stuff.
The idea is I might pick one up during the day from the newspapers or from somebody I speak to. I tend to sort of pick up cuttings and other things and write little notes and keep them in a file. And also I do rely on listeners. An awful lot of people write in and ring in and stop me on the street, and wherever I go to a social function, people have always got something to say.
But after your social function, you've got to go home in the evening and there's that deadline almost hitting you. Have you ever had a time where there was no inspiration at all?
Yes, once or twice I've sat there looking at a sheet of blank paper for the best part of an hour. And then eventually you just crank your mind into action. You've got to do it. That's the thing. That's the discipline.
And then you whip it off in 3 or 4 minutes?
Yes, often with the flimsiest idea. That usually is the quickest. And sometimes, if things are really going bad, I have a couple of large whiskies, and that stimulates things along quite nicely.
But you've always got to find a punchline as well, or nearly always have to find a punchline. Are they easy to come by?
Well, you start off and you go around in a circle, you hope for the best. It's something called free association. Alistair Cook does it. Now, there's a big difference, a world of difference between me and Alistair Cook, but we still work on the same system.
Have you managed to tread on a few people's toes?
1 or 2 people have been annoyed, 1 or 2 things I've said. I'm sorry that happens because the whole thing is only meant to be mildly amusing and harmless. It's to give people a laugh, some relaxation. There's nothing malicious intended in there at all. But of course you can't always get it right. And when that does happen, I'm always terribly sorry because then I've got it wrong, and I don't like that. I'm speaking to an audience I can't see, most of it. But there is an audience I do see, and that's Stu Lowe at the moment, and there's you, and there's Charles Gard. And generally speaking, once I finish and I let the punchline go, I always have a look to see what sort of a laugh I'm getting, and that really tells me how well I've done.
In those days, the Palace Group had the policy of bringing over all the top groups. In fact, every top group in the country, with one exception, appeared at the Palace in that 2-year period, and the one exception, sadly, was the Beatles. So
the Stones were definitely there twice.
Oh, the Stones were there twice. I mean, they were absolutely magic nights. It was something that I'm sure anyone who's listening to the programme who was there will remember, and it's something that you can never forget. The atmosphere on both of those occasions was absolutely electric.
You were on stage then, were you?
Oh yeah, we were on stage. In fact, we drew the short straw because we got informed that we had to play the half-hour spot immediately before the Stones appeared. And believe you me, when you go into a ballroom such as the Palace, which at that time was the biggest ballroom in Europe, I think there were about 8,500, 9,000 people in there, all screaming, "We want the Stones! We want the Stones!"
Yeah, you were on a hammer.
Cage up round the actual stage. You know, it was a terrifying experience, really. But we thoroughly enjoyed it, and we went on. We just turned everything up as loud as we could, made a noise for half an hour, and got away from it, and it was fabulous.
Charlie, were you there then, the Stones concert?
I met the Stones afterwards in the casino, in the breakfast room, remember?
Always one ahead of us. This wasn't the 7 and 6 for breakfast.
I was playing a lot of golf in those days with Freddie and the Dreamers, who was at that time appearing at the Crescent. It was a marvellous night.
Manx Airlines was originally established in 1947, just 2 years after the Second World War, and flew, inter alia, the legendary Douglas C-47 Dakotas. There were a lot of Dakotas around at that time. Indeed, I flew in one with a team from King Bill's to a rugby match at St Bees. We landed at Carlisle. But in 1982 came a new Manx Airlines, a joint venture founded by British Midland Airways and Air UK. Services started on the 1st of November 1982. The first flight was flown from here to Glasgow. 3 weeks after that launch, Geraldine Jameson spoke to the general manager, Terry Lydiard.
The money behind it is, as you know, 75% with British Midland and 25% British and Commonwealth, who own Air UK, who were the other major operator before we took over. But they have put the money up. We have the chairman of Manx Airlines is also the chairman of British Midland, Michael Bishop. But apart from that, we are totally independent. We decide ourselves how to run, what aircraft to run, frequency we operate. We're on our own in that way.
Well, I suppose it's an unfair question actually for you to answer, but where does Michael Bishop's loyalty lie then? Is it a bit of a conflict for him? British Midland Airways, the chairman of one company, and now Manx Airlines.
No, I can't see there's any conflict at all, because the areas in which the airlines operate just don't overlap. They're operating in entirely separate sectors of the aviation industry, and his interests are the same. And as much as if Manx Airlines are profitable, British Midland get some of those profits. So that's no conflict of interest.
Well, why did you feel a need to set up a Manx Airlines?
The need wasn't on the side of the airlines. The need from the airlines was to stop operating into the Isle of Man on incurring the sort of losses which they had been previously. It was a question of what the airlines should do, and we found that both British Midland and Air UK, working along entirely separate lines, had in fact reached the same conclusion that there was no way in which they could make money out of these routes, and both were very seriously considering a total withdrawal from the island. Certainly when each found out that the other was thinking along the same lines, the situation became fairly serious. Certainly would have been very serious for the island. And the directors of the two companies got together and basically, what can we do about it to preserve the air services?
There are moments over the years when a piece of news shocks the whole island. Summerland, the death of David Jeffries, the Winter Hill disaster. On March 23, 1981, came news that Stanley Michael Bailey Halewood, Mike Halewood, had died. He was driving his kids to get fish and chips, and his car was hit by a lorry. The whole Manx nation mourned.
A cold, damp morning in March 1981. Hunt, Taveri, Surtees, Agostini, Duke. The stars of motorsport gather to show their respect and grief for one of motorcycle racing's all-time legends, Mike Hailwood. Just 3 years earlier, Mike, aged 39, had confirmed, if it was ever needed, that he would become a legend by performing one of the greatest comebacks of all time in the 1978 Isle of Man TT races, his 13th win. Mike summed up his feelings at the time.
Through all the laps, and every lap, every corner, they were all cheering and waving programs, and it was just fantastic. And going through one of the parts of the course, a place called Ramsey, which is very slow, I could actually hear the people cheering by the side of the road, which is just amazing.
To win a TT race at any time is an achievement. To win on a different machine after being away for some 11 years is almost unbelievable.
His performance, in particular around the TT course, was absolutely outstanding. The most memorable, of course, was after a long period of virtual retirement. He came back in 1978 on the Ducati and absolutely annihilated the opposition.
Mike enjoyed life. He enjoyed having fun. And as Mike's own home movie shots show, that humour became infectious. But Mike did have a serious side. Mike's widow, Pauline.
Before a race, in the morning, we'd never really sort of talk that much. You know, it was a race day. He wanted to concentrate on what he was going to do. He didn't usually sort of fool around that much on race days before a race. Plenty after the race, but not before a race.
It was a bombshell totalling £120 million, and it was exploded on Manx Radio's Weekend Politics programme. The year was 2004. On the programme was Treasury Minister Alan Bell and MHK David Cannon. Mr Cannon managed to get an admission from Mr Bell that the Manx Electricity Authority, under its chief executive Mike Profit, had taken out unauthorised loans to fund the new natural gas-powered power station at Pulrose. That on top of £185 million the Treasury had handed over. The admission shook the financial foundations of the island.
All this came rather out of the blue this morning. We were waiting for questions. Instead, we got a motion from Martin Quayle, Middle MHK, which asked that at 2:30 this afternoon the Treasury Minister should make a statement on the MEA situation. After some toing and froing over whether a statement should be read and by whom, Richard Corkill said talks had been going on with some urgency for the last few weeks, when the situation over the loan, unapproved by the Treasury it seems, came to light. He also said the Treasury Minister had been asked some very direct questions on Manx Radio. It would have been wrong of him not to answer them, and that's how this figure of 120 million came out. The tight questioning on Manx Radio that forced this into public was touched upon by Mr Bell. Also the hectic work behind the scenes.
Mr Speaker, the discussions with the MEA and my officers have been intense over the last 3 weeks and have really taken up pretty well all my senior officers' time to try and get to the root of a number of issues which have been thrown up.
It had been claimed that rumours of the financial situation at the MEA had been known in the corridors for some weeks. Why, challenged Mr Cannon, member for Michael, did the Chief Minister not make a statement earlier?
What was wrong with him making a statement to the House last week before it was forcibly extracted in a radio show from the Treasury Minister? If it was good enough to be extracted on Sunday, it was surely good enough and more appropriate to be informed to this House last Tuesday.
The Chief Minister told members that an independent firm of accountants were being appointed to look into the affairs at the MEA. And he did admit his government was pretty much in the dark at the moment, to the same extent as members of the public and indeed members of Tynwald.
The government has a duty when coming forward with statements to ensure that what we say is what we know. And I'm afraid there are not too many things that we know at this point.
Manx Radio has been on site for a number of dramatic political occasions, few more so than in 2004 when the then Chief Minister Richard Corkill resigned after he and his wife had been interviewed over allegations in connection with grants paid to them by the Department of Tourism and Leisure. Mr Corkill stepped down to, quote, protect the island's integrity. He denied any wrongdoing, but the news caused disquiet amongst the island's business community. It was the Treasury Minister, Alan Bell, who, at a gathering of that community, sought to reassure.
I did think, though, it might just be opportune, just for a couple of minutes, to say a few words about what has happened in the last couple of days, to try and reassure the business community in particular as to what in fact is going on. Richard has been a great servant to the Isle of Man. He has worked tirelessly for the Isle of Man's benefit and for the business community, both as Chief Minister and previously as Treasury Minister. And I'm sure many of you will have had experience of working with him, and will echo my sentiments when we say how sorry we are to see how the events unfolded over the last couple of days. But what I want to reassure you all today is, in my temporary role as Chairman of the Council of Ministers, is that the show goes on. It is desperately sad that Richard has resigned, but that is only one politician that has left the scene for the time being. And I want to reassure you that the policies of government, and in particular the strategies which I think we're all signed up to in relation to taxation, to the economic development of the island, and to the social development of the island, remain firmly in place, and there is no prospect of them being changed. So I am aware that there has been concerns expressed that there may be a change of direction now, that perhaps some of the taxation policies may not be implemented in the way we all anticipated. But I just want to give you the reassurance that nothing has changed on that front, and I am sure, given the early names anyway that are in the hat for the replacement Chief Minister, that because of the overwhelming support that Tynwald has given to those three strategies over the last few years, and the long-term commitment of Tynwald towards developing a prosperous and caring society, that whoever is appointed as the new Chief Minister, the policies, the underlying policies, will remain in place.
Every year, the island stages a truly remarkable athletic event, encouraging all and sundry to walk within the span of a day some 86 miles, touching all 17 parish gates. Well, nearly all 17. There are so many parish walkers these days, crossing over the road at Bratton is deemed undesirable. The first of the events, as we know it, today was in 1960. We're told that 35 started, as opposed to the hundreds that set off these days. Only 4 finished the entire race, the winner being Douglas postman Stan Cleater in 19 hours 50 minutes. Runner-up was Jim Harvey, who was supposedly 16 when he crossed the finish line. However, he was actually 2 weeks short of his 16th, making him the youngest ever finisher of the parish walk, a record which will almost certainly never be broken. But if we go back to 1852, we find John Cannell of Douglas, who headed on horseback to go round the 17 parishes. The following year he did the same on foot, so the first finisher, 15 hours he took. Now, in 1976, I spoke to someone who was proving to be one of the most successful parish walkers ever. By coincidence, his name was John Cannell.
The real lonely part is really about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. This is when it really, at your lowest ebb, really. And of course, late this year, it's starting later in the evening, starting at 6 o'clock now.
Presumably to take in the cup final?
Yes, I believe, yeah.
What do you regard as the worst patch?
Personally, the worst patch for me is between, say, Peel and Kirkmichael. It's a bit of a lonely stretch. Up north, I don't mind, but it's quite a long stretch from, say, Derby to Bride. It's 7 miles.
Must be nice to turn the corner at the top and head for home.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
mind you, the
lovely.
long, well, how far is it from the top back to Douglas?
From Maccles? From Maccles, it's about 15 miles.
Do you have to steel yourself each year to put in that entry form and put your £1 down?
Yes, I think so.
It's a bit of an effort.
Yes, yeah.
Now, I want to talk about, there have been about 60 finishes, I think, in the history of it.
Yes.
There's only been one time when one person has finished.
Yes, Steve Garden in 1977.
He's been described as a walking machine.
Yes.
Do you think that's accurate?
Yes, I believe. I think it is. He's a great man, Steve.
He's like the Mississippi. He just keeps
goes on and
along,
doesn't he? Yeah. He's a great fella, Steve.
The oars are going, the cheers are going up here at Peel, and Odin's ring as strongly as when she left Trondheim 37 days ago, and they are on Manx soil. The 2 leading members of the crew leap into the water, the crowds cheer, the applause rings out, and Odin's Raven, as each member of the crew now, the Manx and the Norwegian alike, they leap into the waters and onto the beach. And what a greeting they are about to receive His Excellency, the Lieutenant Governor, the patron of the Manx Millennium Voyage, and Lady Paul, who performed the launching in Norway in Manx and in English, and she calls herself the godmother to this vessel, and I'm sure it's a very proud moment for her particularly.
The crew are going to be very hard to get hold of at this point, but they're coming ashore in about 5 or 10 minutes, and if we can sort out a few technical problems, then I hope to have 1 or 2 interviews for us down there at the Longhouse, Peter.
What's it been like out there today it must have been a magnificent feeling.
Tremendous. I think they were very tired indeed. While I was out there, a lot of them were getting their heads down trying to get a bit of sleep, because of course they've been rowing and sailing since about 3 o'clock this morning. I think they got mixed feelings about coming ashore today, because it's been a tremendous adventure, one of the great modern adventures, certainly for Manxmen and perhaps for Europeans as well. What's it, a month and 10 days on an open boat, Viking style, really remarkable.
Thanks indeed there to John Moss, looking suntanned after his day at sea, and as I say, he's got a tremendous problem to fight his way through the thousands of people on that quayside. Odin's Raven now, as I look, has turned broadside on to us. That's bow first to the Viking Longhouse, the other Viking ships surrounding her now.
In the last few months, the Lady Isabella, the Laxey Wheel, named after Governor Charles Hope's wife, has been the subject of some talk over the design of a reception building in front of it. It also, in recent years, has had to have repairs to put right the wear and tear that giant wheel has suffered. But it was the subject of celebration on the nation's National Day in 1970 when, after some years of work, it was able to once again turn in Lady Isabella's memory. Manx Radio were there to capture that moment.
The official reopening of the Lady Isabella was held on Sunday, the 5th of July 1970. At approximately 3:30, the introduction was by Mr. W.E. Quayle, Chairman of the Tourist Board, JP MHK.
The reconstruction has been long and difficult, but our problems have been minor compared with the problems facing Robert Casement in 1854. Perhaps his greatest worry was in wondering if the stonework carrying the wheel and its attendant metalwork would be strong enough to withstand the sheer weight of the structure, to withstand the side forces caused by winter gales howling down this valley, or more insidious of all, the long-term, day-in, day-out vibration of the moving parts. He could well have been forgiven had he constructed a massive functional stone box with heavy buttresses. But he didn't do this. He designed a thing of beauty, of arches and cutaways that delight the eye as much today as in his time. But on Friday evening last, I was privileged to be present at the Laxey School, where the children staged a wonderful pageant of the history of the great Laxey mines. All the children did a first-class job, and I was particularly impressed with the infant classes, all in their period costume, when they sang an unusual song to the tune of London Bridge is Falling Down, My Fair Lady. Its opening line was Laxey Wheel is Falling Down, and its closing line was Isabella Turns Again, My Fair Lady. This then is your fair lady.
In 2001, the island was under siege from foot and mouth disease. Extraordinary precautions taken in the UK, large areas out of bounds, major sporting events cancelled. The Isle of Man had really clamped down on movements, but the farming industry was desperately worried. An outbreak here could mean all island livestock being destroyed. A precaution which apparently was already in place was the herd of the extraordinary Manx Lockton sheep. They were on the Calf of Man, which was owned by Manx National Heritage.
Initially in February, the instructions from the Animal Health Unit of DAF were that no stock should be moved anywhere. But it is fortuitous in a way, because as an isolation ward, the Calf of Man is about as good as you can get. I think now the experience of the foot and mouth outbreak across has probably indicated that although airborne infection is a possibility, it's much less so than contact through other sources.
When the idea of beach buddies was first mooted in 2006, founder Bill Dale may not have envisaged how much of a treasured Manx institution it would become. Over the years, attempts have been made to clean up after those who frankly don't give a monkey's way they're through there. You get the picture. When British Formula One legend Nigel Mansell lived here, he got very involved in his island home. He was a special constable. He also helped launch the Clean Sweep campaign. Now then, here's a voice you may recognise.
Well, we're up at the TT grandstand where there's sensational news that Nigel Mansell appears to be not signing for Ferrari for next year, but in fact is transferred to Leyland Scarab and is at the controls now, and of course is having the complicated layout of these very, very rapid machines explained to him. And there are worries, in fact, that he may not be able to cope with the power that these are going to be laying down when he takes the controls down the TT pit lane. But with number 27 on board, all is set for this takeoff. Not a semi-automatic gearbox as on the Ferrari. A co-driver on his knee, son Leo, and Nigel takes the wheel. Leslie Nichol just getting the story for the Express. These sort of jobs are very difficult to bring off, really, because no one quite knows the procedure. But listen now as we start up. With the turbo charging well, and we're ready for takeoff now, slipping the box into first gear and waiting for the green lights. We're on the red now. Councillor Kennish has the flag, and right in front of him is Nigel's Ferrari road car. I hope he doesn't drive right over the top of that, or then there will be a row. Smoothly into one of the gears anyway. The levers are not on the wheel as in the Ferrari. It's a good laugh, this, but it's a serious campaign, isn't it? And you're keen to lend your name to it.
Yes, it's very serious, and I'm only too pleased to help out because the campaign to keep the environment clean and to keep our island clean. And as everybody knows, the island is our home, and I feel very proud to be part of the Isle of Man, and anything I can do to help, I feel is obviously very good.
In 1970, the Manx tourism industry was starting to struggle. The tried and tested offering of decades was beginning to wilt in the face of the sunshine of the Costa Brava. Reinvention was needed, and that was recognised by Sir Dudley Cunliffe Owen, Managing Director of the Palace and Derby Castle Limited and the Palace Hotel and Casino.
As far as the general run of the tourist industry was in 1970, I would describe it that we had a traditional, usual, rather dull season. And quite frankly, when I look to 1971, I'm extremely worried. I think we'll have another dull traditional season. I think we are going to be hit hard by the package deals which go to the continent where they have sunshine. The package deal is getting cheaper and cheaper, and to physically arrive in the island is getting more and more expensive. And I am of the opinion that the time has come when something really drastic has got to be done in the island to attract the tourists. We've had the tourist report and nothing seems to be happening. And as far as I'm concerned, I think that 1971 will be a worse season than 1970 unless something is done and done fast.
Would you have any particular thoughts of what the immediate action should be?
I am very keen on making some price differences in the island that will attract people. I should like to see drink and cigarettes certainly cheaper. I think we should examine the possibilities of possibly lowering the price of just beer, but something's got to be done to make the island different this season from what it was last season. We seem to have been in the same old tourist rut for years. It's a highly competitive business, and we have got to keep up with the times. And people year after year are not going to be satisfied with either the Palace Ballroom or the Villa Marina, when literally dozens of brand new modern conference halls are being built not only in England but all over Europe.
In 1971, on the site of the old Derby Castle, what was claimed to be the largest indoor leisure complex in Europe was opened. Its name was Summerland. It's not unique, but certainly the camera obscura on Douglas Head, a Victorian-era survivor, comes close. But it was in a delicate state until it had a major overhaul. Prior to that, it was owned by Marion Heaton and her family. Marion used to sit in the doorway, collecting a modest sum from those who wanted to see inside. One of them was David Collister.
I always tell people to stand for a moment or two and let their eyes get used to the change of light. And then, of course, you see the first table. Well, what you see actually is what is happening at that moment at those points on the head. I mean, people walking about, the ships coming and going, or even the buses on the top road. And on one picture you can even see Manx radio quite
That's right.
clearly.
It's lovely to see the movement of the grass and the trees in the wind,
exactly.
and the birds flying on it.
That's right.
I mean, you want to touch it and feel it and so on,
Yes.
don't you, really?
Well, that brings to mind there was a man in here one day, and I thought he was rather a long time, and when he came out, he came round to the front, and he said, "I'm absolutely fascinated." He said, "I've been watching a butterfly go from one flower to another," and he said, "Do you know," he said, "I could tempted to pick it up, it was so plain," and he was absolutely thrilled. And then another man said to me he'd been watching, he thought everything was still, he thought they were just pictures. And he said, and all of a sudden, he says, a seagull swooped down on my hand. And he said, I had such a shock, he said, I thought it was real.
The late John Kenyock was a remarkable raconteur. His Manx accent was soaked in character, and even more so when he was talking to Manx folk, like here, with the committee of the Cronky, the Cronkavoddy ploughing match.
Now, one of the other committee members is Dennis Quirk. Dennis, you were born at Cronkavoddy too. Where were you born at Cronky?
I was born in Cronknafedgig, out by Little London. There was no electric, no water when I was out there, but I would go out again tomorrow, I think.
Would you really?
I think I'd probably be on my own, but it was the water that we got in the winter time came down a spout, and the cows used to drink at the same trough. And in the summertime the spout went dry, and we used to get it down the road, a couple of 100 yards down the road,
Right.
down in a gutter. At the crot. At the crot.
And bus then to St John's School?
Bus to St John's School. I remember one day going to go to school, and I didn't feel like going this day, so I lay in the hedge and watched the bus go. But I seen two people getting off the bus, and they walked up the hill past me. I jumped over the hedge. I didn't want them to see me, so I jumped over the hedge, and they walked up past two men. Well, I always went down to the crossroads to have a look, to make sure somebody seen me at the bus, but the bus was gone. So I went home, and when I got home, the two men were working at home, doing a roof on the cow house. And when they came in at lunchtime, they said, "Why aren't you at school today? Oh, you missed the bus." "We never seen him on the road," they said. That's
Right.
true, that.
I'm sure it is. Mona Kane is sitting alongside me here as well. You were at Little London, you're Jim's sister, of course. And you remember school days and coming from Little London to the bus?
I certainly do.
What about bad weather? Did you'd walk in some terrible weather from Little London to the crossroads?
Well, we used to get some wettings, but you just had to get on with it. But then the neighbours were nice too. They were.
Yeah, well, the Quirks, of course.
The Quirks, and it was like one big family, really.
Take this running. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, rehearsing and background action. And action.
You could feel the pulse beat a little quicker. Not your own pulse, of course, but then we were packed quite tightly as the railway station shot was rehearsed and rehearsed. And while I was waiting, I sought out line producer Simon Scotland for a few words on what was going on.
At Castletown, we're here basically all of today to shoot the exteriors of the train, and then when you actually see the film finished, the image is shot inside the train. We're actually going to be shooting down in the shed in Douglas and then putting the images in the background, because it's just not the scenery you see on the Isle of Man here. There's some rather bizarre events that will be going on in the background, so we have to do it both ways. But it's a full day here out of the station.
There's this famous thing about you have to shoot about 6 weeks to get about 2 minutes film. I mean, how much film would actually be shot here? How much will appear in the actual finished product?
Right, we would probably actually load about 3,500, 4,000 feet of film stock through our camera in any one day. And if we get 3 minutes, we're doing very well.
In past years, a businessman who made a great impact on Manx life was Graham Ferguson Lacey. He bought several large commercial properties, but it was when he took an interest in the historic household names on the island that he really gained attention, as he admitted to David Collister.
Inevitably, the ones that people became aware of because of their profile were Russian Abbey for the reasons we've discussed, and the nunnery. People forget that the nunnery had been on the open market for 4.5 years before, in fact, I acquired it, and indeed it was with the encouragement of a distinguished politician here that I look at it, because there was a real concern that it would be properly protected and preserved and secured for a use that people could be comfortable with, that was commensurate with its importance and history.
You had this extraordinary ability, though, to buy properties which government rather, I think, would like to have had, indeed had owned in the past, and then be able to sell them back to the government virtually at pretty good prices.
Well, no, with respect, that's not correct, David. I didn't buy Bishop's Court from the government, I bought it from a private individual.
But they had, in previous years, a long time back, had owned it, of course.
Yes, and I haven't sold that back to the government. That's been bought by a private individual. As far as Russian Abbey is concerned, I never had any intent whatsoever of selling it to the government. What I did cost me real money financially, but I was pleased to make a contribution and to put something back because of other benefits I've enjoyed on the island. So to date I've sold only one property to the government, but you're absolutely right. Historically, the nunnery was owned by the government, and
you might be selling it back to them?
I doubt that. I'm aware that the government had heated debates and discussions, I think it was back in 1976, David, about whether they should keep it or not. And I know there were other opportunities in the past for Russian Abbey, and for various reasons that didn't happen, as indeed was the case with Bishop's Court. But I think also, to be fair to the politicians, it's easy for us, having lived through a near unbroken decade of phenomenal growth here in the Isle of Man economically, that the adjacent isle would have been proud to have envied, that prior to that, the government didn't have the resources and the reserves to hold on to a nunnery or to buy from the church a bishop's court, or indeed to do what's now being done at Russian Abbey. And so there is a sense in which part of the good fortunes of the economic miracle of the island this last decade have made that possible.
One of the more controversial issues of the last century was the use on this island of the birch as a punishment to deter young people who had, in the views of the courts, acted like hooligans. This was the era of mods and rockers in England. The practice was seen by many residents as a valuable deterrent. Here's David Collister.
1972 was the crucial year which marked the beginning of the end of the practice. Someone who was closer than most to the use of the birch is the retired police constable Henry Corlett. From 1958 onwards, he was frequently called on to administer the birch and to collect, during the winter, the slender branches required to make them.
Union Mills used to get the birch trees from,
Yeah.
on the old railway line down there.
Uh-huh.
And then you put it in there to dry off. And then you made your own birch. It had to be a certain weight, a certain length, and was weighed properly. And magistrates would examine it before and afterwards, that they made sure it was the right birch that you used.
Right. So they'd be quite thin
yeah,
branches.
very thin. I don't think the whole lot would weigh about 12 ounces.
Mm.
And it had a bit of plaster on it for a handle.
Yeah.
And you used it when you were given the birch. That's what you used.
Right.
And the magistrate would be examine the birch, as I say, and the doctor would be in the room.
A doctor
would be present when it took place, except
Yeah.
one doctor who wouldn't go in. He stood outside.
Oh.
And if he heard if someone got 6 strokes of the birch, and he'd had about 3, and he suddenly shouted, the doctor would knock on the door and say, "Right, that's enough."
Oh, really?
So
and did the doctor have the right to stop the
Yes,
birch?
yeah. So instead of getting 6 birch strokes, he might only get 3.
Mm.
Of course, sometimes he never heard the doctor, and he got an extra one.
All right. Did the person what position was the person being birched in? Were they bent over? Were they upright?
They were bent over a chair, and there was a constable each side of them, kind of held on each arm.
Yes.
And
did some of them struggle?
Some of them did, yes. But there was 2 policemen in there to hold them, like.
Mm.
And in the early days, you birched them with the trousers off.
Yes.
And then latterly, you birched them with the trousers on.
Ah.
And children got the cane, what they call the cane, which in my opinion was worse than the birch.
Was that on the backside as well?
Yeah, on the backside. Just one cane, like a teacher, school teacher had.
As they would get in a public school.
Yes,
or whatever.
yes.
In Manx social circles, there were few with greater connections than Eunice Salmon, MBE. In her life, she met many notable people, including Diana, Princess of Wales. Indeed, as she told David Collister, she was in St Paul's Cathedral for Lady Diana's wedding with Charles, Prince of Wales.
After the wedding, everybody went to go out of St Paul's, and it was so friendly. The Snowdens were there, all sorts of people were there, and they were all saying, wasn't that lovely? It was like a family wedding, a very big family wedding. And I had arranged to meet Sir Nigel and Lady Cecil, and I went in their car from St Paul's, and we went down all that route with all the crowds. It was absolutely wonderful.
Well then, for the Princess, 16 years of constant pressure from the media, you could say. Not something that a normal person could easily cope with, and she was quite remarkable.
I think she was. I think she was absolutely wonderful. Of course, she broke down at various times when she wasn't well, but I think by and large, and today, television's been on all the time, hasn't it?
That's right.
Everybody's saying how wonderful she was.
When did you hear the news, and did you feel the same sort of shock?
Oh, terrible shock. Terrible shock. I was in Kent, actually, this morning, staying with some friends who have a vineyard. And when I came down to have my breakfast, my hostess said, tragic news. Princess of Wales has been killed. Oh, awful. Absolutely awful. And I'm devastated. And I have that book on my table there.
This is the dresses collection.
The dresses, the collection that was sold at her son's behest.
Yeah.
And here it is, and I'll treasure that. I've got a lot more books, as you can see. I did meet her once. To my knowledge, she's not been to the Isle of Man. I met her once. I went with Susan Sangster, and we had this golfing weekend, and we had a great dinner at the Palace Lido, which is now destroyed, and it was £100 a ticket, and Kevin Woodford was brilliant. He cooked dinner for all these guests, I can't remember how many guests there were, without a kitchen.
Yes.
No water, no nothing.
This was for one of Diana's charities.
One of her charities, Birthright.
He's larger than life, louder than most, and when he elected to climb the highest mountain on earth, Brian Blessed came to the Isle of Man to make sure he was authentically dressed, because he wanted to do the climb in the same style and use the same material that was worn by the early climbers, in particular George Mallory. And that meant coming to Timwood Mills, where Mallory came for his kit, mostly tweed in those days. Blessed had the option of wearing something that was still in keeping but more modern, but he decided against that, as he told me.
I knew in my heart the mountain would be very kind to us because I knew it would be kind to me because we were going there for the right reasons. We weren't going there to dig up bodies. We weren't going there to find Mallory's body and Irving's body. It's the last thing we wanted. We're there to really pay tribute to these great climbers. And for the mystery, we weren't there to solve the mystery of whether they climbed it or not. As you know, Mallory disappeared and Irving disappeared in 1924, about 800 feet from the summit when they were last seen. We're there really to kind of find their spirit, not their bodies. And we felt that mystery is a rare commodity these days.
You were dressed up in tweeds, of course.
I was dressed up.
How did they stand up to
it?
it?
The Manx loom people, they'd made these tweeds for me and trousers and all that. And I can tell you this, that amazingly, I had backup modern material that was made to look Finch in 1922 made the first duvet jacket and duvet trousers, thank God, and so therefore I could have used that kind of thing modelled on his if I'd have wanted to. But amazingly, I kept in the 22 gear that the Manx people had made.
There are hopes that the King may be able to visit this island in the not-too-distant future, but as Prince of Wales he was here a number of times. We rarely hear a royal speaking in public. They generally don't do interviews. So the time-honoured method is to follow behind the royal progress and after a moment inquire of those who have spoken to the royal personage what the conversation involved. This is what Chris Price did in Craignish in 1996 when Prince Charles visited the island.
Your name is?
Rishi Jennings.
And you're from Ballasalla, are you?
Yeah.
Now you're here today all dressed up in this costume. Tell me about this costume.
Well, this dress here was, it's locked and it's real.
Yes.
And my grandma sewn this shawl for me.
And you've got some eggs in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't offer them to the prince then?
No.
Well, there we have it. A taster of the broadcasting achieved by Manx Radio over 60 years. There is much, 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 much more in our archives. Perhaps sometime in the future we may once again visit and rummage about. It won't be me. I myself will be in the great archive in the sky, looking down, but hopefully still listening in. Goodbye.